Today I'm talking to Sally Maynard. Hi, Sally.
Hi.
How are you? So we
No, right.
finally managed to meet up.
Yeah, sorry about all
So
the delay.
look, traditional first. Oh no, it's no problem. You're not the worst.
Oh,
I'll tell you about one of the worst ones. You're not the
okay.
worst by a long way.
Oh, well, good to know.
Yeah, no, it's okay. So look, traditional first question is, what do you do?
What do I do? Well, currently I'm an education lecturer at Coventry University. Prior to that, I was a senior lecturer at another university in York. And I had lots of roles there, but I was head of international development, and I also was the lead for primary languages, training teachers. So a lot of my career has been around enthusing people to learn languages. Actually, I'm just going to get rid of something that's come up on my screen. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
So I've always been quite passionate about it. So, but we can talk about that a bit later. But that's my current role. So I'm an education lecturer. I train teachers and support students really in their understanding of primary education. So.
Yeah, cool. So now, obviously, with language, you must have been interested in this very early on.
Yeah, I mean, I've always had I don't know. I've always found languages quite easy, but I've always found them really interesting and fascinating. So I did take a languages route with my exams. At school, so I did French and Italian, and then I went on to do a kind of a business qualification, sort of bilingual secretarial thing, which enabled me to work abroad when I was a lot younger, easily. And then after I'd done that for a while, I decided to go to university and study languages to a degree level. So I did, and studied French and Mandarin.
Right,
And
that's interesting.
yeah. I mean, French was, obviously I'd studied that for a long time, but Mandarin was completely new to me. And the degree was around linguistics as well. So you had to learn another language that you didn't have any preconceived ideas about. And if you've studied languages to post A level, you have a good understanding of how the languages work, European languages anyway. So there was a choice between Hindi, Mandarin, or Sanskrit. So I decided to learn Mandarin. So that was sort of a 2-year program, I suppose, for learning Mandarin, and that was quite challenging, but interesting. And then when I was doing my degree, part of the one of the modules was linguistic development in young children, and so I had to gather some data for that, and I went into a primary school and did some interviews with children. And I just found their language development really interesting. And so I decided that I'd trained to be a primary teacher. I hadn't ever thought about being a teacher, really. In fact, I was probably quite against it. You might know that feeling, I don't know.
Yes, I do know that feeling.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people who know that feeling as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think if I'd gone straight from school to do it, well, I don't think I would have done, actually. It was only when I'd had, quite a lot of experience in the business world and just generally, really, that I started to be really passionate about it. So I trained as a primary teacher, and then subsequently worked in primary schools for quite a long time. But in all of the classes that I taught, I always taught them languages, French or Mandarin, and Italian. And and it just fascinated me how easily they engaged with it and how interested they were. And there was always that. I mean, I don't know. When I left school, and you talk to people and you tell them that you can speak languages, I've never had anybody say to me, "Oh God, I wish I wouldn't have wanted to do that." Most people say, "Oh, that's great. I really wish that I'd worked harder at school with languages." But we never seem to be able to translate that into secondary school. There's always that kind of attitude towards languages.
What do you think that is?
Why?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's a general mindset, to be honest, in England, because we're quite arrogant about languages. We don't think we need to learn any other languages, and so I think the relevance of it is lost. And we just give out subliminal messages the whole time. That they start it at year 7 and they can drop it in year 9. So
yes,
it's just giving out that message. It's not important. And also
yes,
at primary level, even though it's now statutory, it doesn't start until year 3. So they're 7 before they start learning, if they do at all, because lots of schools don't have the expertise, or they don't have I suppose the enthusiasm really, or the confidence to teach it. So we've got a real shortage of expertise in schools, so it's never taught very well. But in any case, we're not saying to children that it should be part of their learning. We're just saying that it's an add-on really, and it's not that important. So my kind of aim, I suppose, when I was teaching in schools, was to try and enthuse children as much as possible. And I can honestly say that I never had a child say, no, not languages today. They really did enjoy it. And I mean, being a teacher as well, that if you're enthusiastic, then you project that enthusiasm onto children, don't you? And if you're not enthusiastic, then the opposite. And I think that contributes to the kind of the attitude that we have. So it's not just, even though it's now statutory, there's still a lot of mountains to climb before we can ever get to the point where we think that languages are important. So I kind of made it a bit of a mission really when I was training teachers to enthuse them. And I know quite a lot of them were enthusiastic, but alongside that, I felt it was really important that they had an international experience, because learning a language on its own isn't particularly interesting, and it takes a long time and it takes a lot of self-discipline. But if they have that experience of being abroad and having to actually learn the language and having to actually engage with it, it just makes it so much more relevant. Plus, it gives them all sorts of other skills as well. So, sorry, I've got on my high horse a bit, really, but I mean,
this is good, because what I was going to say to you is lots of things you've said, I can go, it's exactly the same with music. This idea that it doesn't appear to be relevant, and there's lots of subliminal messages about that, and also it's not early enough. And there's sort of the involvement with children to do with languages or to do with music doesn't have to be formal, really. It just needs to be.
Absolutely not.
It has to be more of a game in a way.
Yeah, I think learning languages through song and games and from early years is vital. I mean, when I was teaching in primary schools, somebody took my class while I took the rest of the school for languages, which it isn't really the ideal way of doing it, because it's not really sustainable, because whenever I left a school and went to another one, nobody else took it up, so again, you were giving children the wrong message really, but at least I suppose they had some engagement with it. But yeah, learning from early years is vital, and I've seen children in China and Japan, and all over the world, really, 2- and 3-year-olds who could just switch from English to Mandarin or to Japanese. And you just think, well, I think we project an adult's perspective on it, because, you know, adults think that languages are hard, but it's not a big deal for children because they're assimilating all sorts of information anyway. So I think, I mean, when I was working for the government around the national curriculum, I was really desperate for it to be introduced from early years, but unfortunately there wasn't enough research at the time to convince them, I suppose, that it was necessary. All sorts of anecdotal stuff, you know, I mean, loads of people say, oh yeah, children, you know, engage with languages, but you need to have that hard data, really, which is, you know, what I'm trying to do currently. Actually, I'm trying to get some research together to support that, but I don't, it's very difficult from lots of perspectives, because we've, you know, downgraded languages over the years. There's a lack of expertise in schools to actually teach it. I'm guessing it's the same with music, actually.
It's totally the same thing.
Yeah.
Absolutely,
I mean,
the same thing.
Yeah, and I think, you know, languages develop similar cognitive skills in the same way that music does, and it's just so frustrating that it's these kind of these subjects are sidelined and they're not seen as important. And
the thing is, you're talking about, you know, having sort of data for it. I mean, even the stuff that's anecdotal is so obviously pointing a direction.
Yeah.
If people are, if a child can speak more than one language, their ability to think, because there is this thing of what appears to me from the outside, and I would certainly say this is true with music. There's something goes on with critical thinking that when people have got this other aspect, whether that's language or it's music or something, it's not like they're just stuck in one sort of paradigm. That's what it appears to me. Now, if you say that to people, it's like, yeah, it's sort of obvious. But whether you've got the data for it or not, you know, and I'm thinking, well, it's almost like this idea of trying to prove something, because again, you could point. Yeah, sorry.
No. I mean, I think that unfortunately, you know, we live in a neoliberalistic world where, you know, we need data and targets, and, you know, we have to actually reach those targets, and if we don't, then, you know, then it's not valid. But I do feel that yeah, sure, there is other kind of data that you can collect, but I suppose it has to be underlined with you know, the theoretical perspective, at least in education, so that it can convince people that it is something worthwhile.
It's convincing the people with the money.
Well, yeah,
funding and all the rest of it, right?
Yeah.
So again, that makes sense. The accountant style of thinking that something has to be, you know, you can put it on a balance sheet type of thing. Yeah. Obviously, this is where music has a lot of problems, because again, you can't easily look at the flow of money. That if you put money into that, that's going to make this happen. Because sometimes it's so subtle. You know, you're mentioning things about some of the problems that we have here with attitudes, and obviously when you see people from other countries who can speak English, I did some examining in Greece for guitar exams, and Malta. I mean, in Malta they speak about 3 or 4 languages anyway, but in Greece, the ones that were really, really keen on playing could speak English. And it sort of goes with the territory. But again, you know, it's this thing that if they're watching films, quite likely they're going to be in English. The pop songs that they're learning and rock songs are going to be in English.
Well, exactly. I mean, that's why it's so difficult, actually, to teach another language in England, because as you say, I mean, when you're learning English in another country, the cultural aspect of it lends itself very much to, you know, developing your learning. But you know, you have to be really committed to be able to, you know, access songs, as you say, and films and, well, books, whatever. And they're not as easily accessible. And that's another reason why languages are difficult for children to learn. But there are some other aspects in the way that we teach it as well, which doesn't lend itself to children engaging with it really. Can we just stop for 1 minute? I've just remembered I've got some bread in the oven. Won't be a sec.
Okay.
This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, we're back on.
Yeah, no, yeah, the way we teach it is really not conducive to children engaging, because currently there's no national policy as regards what language is being taught, for how long. I mean, there is a national curriculum for languages, but you know, it's sidelined. And so children, when they go up to secondary, so I'm just getting rid of something in my, when they go up to secondary, they're at all different levels, and they might have learnt, you know, different languages. They might not have learned any, you know, so when they go up to secondary school, or they transfer to secondary school, that's problematic in itself. But also, when, you know, in primary, you can concentrate on the speaking and listening side of it. But when they go to secondary, they're having to learn all 4 skills at once. You know, it's the speaking, listening, reading, writing, and you know, they just go, whoa, this is too hard, I can't do it. And that's what turns a lot of them off, really.
Yes, of course it does. Yes, yeah, because again, you know, if you think about when children learn language, they learn it by listening and then copying, right? And then playing. And then gradually, you know, they may look at books while they're being read to them and so on. But it's that type of thing where they start gradually becoming immersed in the language, right? Now, there's an interesting case in point. My father could speak two other languages fluently and a smattering of 2 others. So he could speak Arabic and he could speak Swahili,
right?
And a bit of Italian and a bit of German. Now, that's because obviously he was a professional soldier and he spent a lot of time in Egypt, and then he spent a lot of time in Nairobi. And his point was, no, I don't know about the writing or anything like that, but he could certainly speak it. And you know, there was once we were walking down Petticoat Lane Market, and he sort of suddenly took off. And what had happened was he'd noticed this guy with all these sort of Arab, you know, his Arab garb on, walking along, and he rushed after this guy and started talking to him. And this Arab's face was amazing. He was completely amazed that somebody was talking to him in Arabic, and they had the conversation for about 5 minutes. And his point was, you know, you only really need to be, he used to say, 6 months, as long as you're in the culture and you're there and you've got to use the language. And I think that's the, you know, the thing. If we could just engage, and it's the same with, I would say it's the same with music. You've got to engage people in the use of it, and not to be frightened about making mistakes.
Yeah, that's very important, actually. And I mean, and I know that'll be similar to music, because it's all about having that safe learning environment, isn't it? And them understanding that it's actually okay to make mistakes, and that's how you learn. But I think lots of teachers are worried about, you know, coming across, were coming across as not knowing everything about the subject, if you understand what I'm sure you do.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
That's crazy, I mean, that giving children that kind of message is totally ridiculous, because nobody knows everything, and feeling, I don't know, having that kind of inferior complex, if you like, if you don't know, or coming across to children as not knowing everything. I've always looked on that, as if a child asks you something and you don't know what it means, or what the answer is, it's an opportunity to to learn together, and it's giving them that vital message that learning's for life, really. So I find it I find it quite difficult in schools when there are teachers that refuse really to engage with the teaching of languages, because they lack the self-confidence and the subject knowledge, really, to do it, they think, effectively. But one of the things that I did, because I recognised that, was to write some resources for teachers which catered for those that were non-specialists. And I'm guessing there are similar, well, I know that there are similar resources for music, and there are lots of people don't feel as though they can, or teachers feel that they can't deliver music effectively, but there are lots and lots of resources that enable them to do so. And it's the same for languages. So that's, I've written quite a few resources for teachers, to support them in that. But it's more than that. I mean, you can have the resources, but they've got to have the willingness to do it. And I don't know whether it's the same with music. I imagine it is. But if you haven't got the head behind you, you won't have that whole school ethos of conveying to the children that it's important. And I'm sure you come across that, and that's frustrating in itself.
It is, totally. And this idea about something being the correct way to do something, I come at the perspective of music about engagement with it, and the sort of creative aspect, because once something's happening, you can go in and tidy things up and push it in a little bit of another direction and nudge it in a direction. As long as people are doing it, as long as kids are engaged with it, because they can go and find out things themselves. Once you fire people up, and this must be true with language. Well, it is true with languages, because they could find things on the internet. It's all out there, but they just need to have that enthusiasm to discover. And you were saying about the importance of people being engaged with the culture, maybe going out, spending time in another country and all the rest of it. And I think that's the other thing, because this sort of the link with the culture that the language comes from, because that's part of the language anyway, isn't it? How
can't
people
learn
think. No, but of course that's what happens when people learn a language in a classroom often. But it's sort of not involved in the culture.
No.
People don't. It's just a dry subject, and that's true with music often. Especially the old style of teaching music. I think it's even worse when everyone just sat around and listened to Beethoven or Mozart. Even if you like Beethoven or Mozart, what's it actually going to do for you musically?
I mean, I think well, now more than ever, it's hugely important for children to understand other cultures and engage with them and accept them and develop that understanding, because we're in such a sorry state as regards sort of international harmony, I suppose. The thing about student teachers having those international experiences is that it enriches them in all sorts of ways, and then that transfers into the classroom as well, because they've had those experiences, they understand an awful lot more about the world, and that's what they can actually convey to children. And with at primary level, it's very easy to teach languages in a cross-curricular way. So you can engage with, you know, when it's a festival, for example. I mean, even if you're just looking at Christmas, I mean, you know, that all European countries celebrate it, you know, differently, and they can look at that, and that's going to engage them. They can certainly engage with the music from different countries, and I'm sure you've done that. The art, you know, the literature. I mean, you can introduce languages in any lesson, actually. Even PE, you know, and games. You know, you can just give them instructions in the languages, and you know, it's not difficult. You know, it's not a stretch for teachers to do that. So, but if you're conveying to them that it's possible and that you're interested in it and you're interested in, you know, developing your skills, then that's going to transmit itself to children, or it should do. But learning a language and speaking to somebody, it's just so satisfying, you know, in their own language. I'm sure, you know, that's what your father experienced.
Yes.
You know, I've taken lots of primary school children on trips abroad as well, and I can't tell you how excited they get when they speak to somebody in French, say if we're in France, and then that person understands what they say and then speaks back to them in French, and then they understand what's been spoken back to them, and they kind of engage, and they just get so excited, and just a tremendous sense of achievement. And you know, that's something that, you know, we should be encouraging, and I just don't understand why it's downplayed so much. And I'm absolutely certain you have the same experience with music, you know, and I know at primary level, if you haven't got a music specialist in a school, the school is, you know, really deprived, actually, you know, because music is so much part of children's lives, and or it should be. So I've worked in schools where there isn't anybody who is really has much expertise in music, if you like, and the schools are much richer, you know, when they are able to engage with all of the different arts, if you like, and it's just tragic that we just focus so much on English and maths. I mean, obviously they're important, but
but you know, all these other things are important, and we keep this thing about maths and English. You know, okay, English is our mother tongue, but there's lots of stuff that you learn in those subjects that you never, particularly maths. I mean, I was good at maths, and when I left school, I never used that stuff again.
I don't know. I don't know whether I agree with you about that, because I think maths.
Well, I was going to say something actually, because I went and worked in a bank.
No, you would have used your maths then.
No, I relearnt. I learnt how to add up differently to how I was taught, because this was in the days of ledgers and pass books. You know, their savings books.
Time to go back.
Right? No, it was.
I know exactly what you mean.
40 years ago. So the point was that the way I'd learnt to add up was rubbish. So you then very quickly picked up the fact that you just had to make multiples of 10, and it struck me. It's like, well, why didn't I learn that? I actually worked that out for myself, but I would watch somebody else do it and realise what they were doing, because you only had to go and see somebody selling vegetables in a fruit stall or something, fruit and vegetable stall, and that's how they did it. And I thought, well, so I've learned something that was, you know, not just adding up was not correct. You know, it wasn't the most efficient way of adding up. So I was really sort of taken aback by that. So I'm not saying that the skills of that you learn by learning maths, the things that become a way of thinking, aren't important. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm just saying there's a lot of stuff to do with that and science and all the rest of it, that again, there's a messaging thing going on there, that these subjects are more important than the arts, languages, and whatever. And I don't think they are. They're at least equal.
No, I agree.
You know, it's equal. It's not that they're more important.
No. I do think that everything has to be taught creatively, and
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
maths can be taught creatively, and you know, when you think about it, it is relevant to every area of their
Yes,
lives.
but it's not taught creatively, is it?
No, no.
Generally. I mean, there
Well,
might be a little bit different now, but
I
certainly
think it is
wasn't
in
when I was a kid.
primary where it should be anyway. I mean, but again, you've always got that. Maths is another subject where there's a lack of confidence. You know, there's lots of teachers at primary level who aren't. I mean, there's
Yes.
lots that are, but you know that often, you know, people don't feel that, you know, their maths ability is good enough. But again, it's about engaging and being enthusiastic about it. And I think, you know, with any subject, as I said, you know, children are going to pick up on it. But science, again, can be taught creatively. And children really engage with science, and but that's been downgraded as well. You know, it keeps going from the core curriculum and then out again, and it's currently out. You know, and lots of
Oh, is it? Oh, right. Okay. Okay.
yeah, no, lots of schools don't teach science in the same way that it was when it was a core subject, because you know it had to be the same as maths and English almost, certainly on a daily basis. But it's now tends to be backed up. Sometimes schools have science days or they have science weeks or something like that.
All right. Okay.
So it's not necessarily taught on a daily basis. I mean, not all schools do it like that, but it's definitely, you know, there is a decline. In fact, one of my students is doing a research project on that at the moment. She's looking at the, you know, the decline of science teaching over the years. So, and she's got some really interesting data on it. So, I think that sadly, you know, there's lots of subjects that are being pushed out that, you know, shouldn't be. But I just don't think that we look at it from a balanced perspective. You know, it tends to be the focus on English and maths, which, you know, to a certain extent you can understand, but you know, not all the time. You know, there should be that kind of opportunity for children to be creative and to understand that actually your brain works in different ways. You know.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
And
Because the
yeah.
thing is, again, you know, some of the great scientists of the early times taught themselves. People like Faraday and people like that. And again, those people were obsessed with observation. And I think it keeps coming back to this thing about firing children up with enthusiasm. You know, what is it that you need to do to make them inquire about things, to give them information? And you know, I'm not saying this is not a new idea. I mean, even the horrible histories is a good example of that thing of just getting kids to go like, "Wow, that's really crazy," you know, and just finding it interesting. And
well, I think you mentioning inquiry is really important, because having an inquiry-based approach, I think, is fundamental, really, in terms of how children learn, because you know they're curious. You know, they're curious about things, and if you can spark that curiosity from an early age, then you know you're there, really. And
yes, I think
languages,
so.
languages and music, you know, are good examples of that. If you can really kindle that kind of spark and fire that they want to find out more, you know, but there's an awful lot that needs to happen before that's going to be done, you know, on a basis that, you know, is goes without saying, really. And schools, as you know, are people driven, and if you haven't got somebody in the school that's enthusiastic and on fire about something, it ain't going to happen, you know.
Well, I've been in schools that have had one person change in a department, and it has had the most profound effect, good and bad. And you think, well, it's, I don't know how to put this into words. So when it's a detrimental effect, you think, you know, it's catastrophic. It can take. I'm thinking of one particular school which you would be aware of. It's a fantastic music department, and literally declined within a term. from being something really astonishing to just not even ordinary. It was terrible.
Because one person left me.
Yeah, and then somebody else joined that was just didn't, just didn't sort of. They were obviously good at interviews, but not very good. Not very good in the sort of teaching of the subject. Or inspiring people, because again, because the arts, if children are involved, if kids are involved in doing things, shows and whatever, that's the thing that sparks them. That's the thing that sparks them off. And then it's just it seems so obvious, but it's obviously not as obvious as it seems, obviously, because of what happens. But yeah. And interestingly, because I've taught in independent schools as well as state schools, and to some extent, there's obviously more funding in certain areas with independent schools, and some of them there's just a money machine where there's limitless amounts of money, and others there isn't. They're quite strapped for cash, but there's still because they still have to wave a banner. I've always thought about this with independent schools, because people need to know that they're there. They would spend time doing things like shows, and that engaged. Obviously, the parents could come and see that and everything, but also there'd be posters around the town or whatever that the school was in, making people aware that these things were on, and it raised their profile. Now, I've often been puzzled by, obviously to do with music now, but I've obviously been puzzled by the way that often doesn't happen. Well, I'm not saying it doesn't happen in state schools, because it does, but there's lots of schools it doesn't happen. It's not. It's just something that the kids do for them, but not in any way that shows the school in the community. And that seemed to be very different between independent schools and state schools.
Yeah, but I reckon that 99% of states of independent schools have music, and they have languages taught from early years. Which kind of begs the question: why is that not happening in state schools?
Yes.
I think one of the things that teachers say, which has a lot of basis, is the fact that they're too busy, the curriculum's overcrowded, and they can't include everything that they want to include, which is true to a certain extent. But as I said, languages can be taught in a cross-curricular way, so you don't have to allocate an hour a week to it.
No.
You can introduce it in other subjects and very effectively. It's just that they probably won't have the confidence or the understanding of how to actually implement that. So that's been another one of my kind of passions. That it needs to be taught in a cross-curricular way in order for it to be included at all. But you can train teachers, and you can tell students this, till they're blue in the face. But if they're going to a school that's not interested in supporting that for whatever reason, and it may be because they feel it's not going to be sustainable, or it's not going to be, they don't think that it's important. They actually say that quite often because there's other stuff that they've got to do. It's only when you get somebody in the school that actually wants to see it through that it's going to work. And these kind of things, as take a lot of work, and a lot of commitment. It's if you're interested in something and you want to introduce it into a school, then you have to work hard to do that. And some people just feel as though they haven't got the time or the inclination. I kind of get that, but I just feel that when you're whatever you teach, you're charged to do the best you possibly can, for the children. And for me, that's got to be a holistic approach. So it's not just, emphasizing one or two particular areas. It's to give children the opportunity to fulfill their potential. And, they may not be particularly good at maths or English, but they may be, amazing on the piano or sax, or, in my case, in languages, and it's up to us to actually draw out that potential.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
So
Yeah,
it is frustrating.
it is, which actually sort of takes it back to one of the comments you made earlier on, that actually there's a cultural aspect to this here. We don't consider other languages to be important because, we speak a language that a lot of other people speak, and that, I don't know how we get around that. Well, it might do over time because we might not be so important.
It's not going to happen, overnight, that's for sure. I mean,
well, it's not going to happen overnight.
I mean,
but
I've been involved with it for a lot of years, and before it was statutory, there's always been, pockets of enthusiasm throughout the country, but there's never been drawn together nationally. Now, when it did become statutory, everybody thought, well, great, it's actually going to happen, but it still isn't. And Ofsted occasionally have a deep dive into languages, but rarely, and they're not going to be focusing on that for a good while, because there isn't the funding for schools to get any resources and to develop their teaching really, or to train teachers. So, and it's not just languages that's suffering, as you know. I mean, it's everything else. The arts have been sadly neglected.
yes.
So
yes,
as you know, I mean, what can you say? I mean, it's just it is very frustrating. But I mean, I just feel as though I've got to keep plodding away and making sure that it's interesting, because lots of students that I've taught in the past have because I've been really fortunate in that I've been able to develop lots of international contacts and develop placements for students, and lots of students have said to me, I hadn't even thought about going abroad before you mentioned it. And it's not an exaggeration to say that those opportunities and the opportunity to engage in other cultures and languages has changed their lives and their lives path. I mean, I still get students contacting me saying that if it hadn't been for you, I wouldn't be here, and that's really satisfying. But I still want I want languages to be available to all children, like I'm guessing you do I know that you feel like that about music. And I do think that's one of the biggest frustrations, that it's not an equal opportunity for children, is it? That even before it was statutory, there were languages clubs, what I mean, that's, it should be for all children, so that is kind of my, mantra really, that everybody should have that equal opportunity. But I don't see it happening anytime soon.
No, I don't.
But we have to keep plugging away, don't we, Vic? We have to keep doing this.
Yeah, we do. And, I see this a lot with regard to, because I teach, all different ages, from very young to quite elderly. And at every level I see, and I would say this is absolutely true with languages as well, learning a language, how important it is to your mental well-being. So I've noticed that teaching people that are on the older end of the sort of spectrum, that actually committing things to memory is so, I see their ability to memorize improve, because people don't, after they don't learn new things, and everything's all readily available. So if you're learning a language and you've got to learn words and all the rest of it, this is really brilliant, because I've often pondered, when you see really old actors and actresses who are still working. Their mental agility is extraordinary.
Well, exactly.
And it's all about learning. Yeah, it's all about learning new things. So learning a new language would be a powerful way of helping people fend off, Alzheimer's and
it is
dementia.
absolutely. And I think there's lots of research to prove that. So, I mean, from that perspective alone, it should be, deemed as much more important. And
yes.
And learning it from, it takes a long time, to learn a language, like it does to play a musical instrument. And
exactly.
From that perspective alone, it should be introduced from early years.
Yes, I think it should be on the national health.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, because again, you're talking about things being cross curricular. I mean, it's that sort of idea of instead of sitting down and doing what we tend to do, because this is how the whole system tends to work. It's like, I'm now going to go and learn my whatever, and I'm going to sit down for half an hour. Instead of that, it's like, no, this is something that you do anyway. I encourage kids. Guitars are out of bags and whatever, just lying around, pick it up, play for a bit, put it down again. You don't sort of sit down and think, oh, I've got to practice for an hour, got to practice for half an hour. Just keep playing, put it down, do it while you're doing something else. And it's like, same with languages. If you're using another language to do, in PE, or you've got your art class, but you just happen to be doing some of it in French, so it's not that you're focusing on the language, but the language is being used. It's a really powerful way of learning, and it becomes more of a game. I think the more things become a game, the more potent they become. It might,
Yeah, and actually, the mind is capable of amazing things. I mean, there's a very simple game that I play with young children, which is just noughts and crosses actually. But you start off with just a number in each of the squares, and they have teams, and they obviously have to say what the number is in the target language, whichever one you're looking at. But then you could introduce, instead of just having the number, you could introduce mathematical concepts. So it might be multiplication or division or whatever it is. So the children have to work out the answer, and they're translating it backwards and forwards, and the brain is actually doing all sorts of, agile things. So that in itself is developing children's cognitive skills, hugely. And I've done science lessons in languages as well. And again, they're having to think about difficult concepts and translate it from the mother tongue into the language, and then think about it again, perhaps when they're doing some explanations. But it's just fascinating to see how they actually cope with it, because they think that they can't, but when they actually attempt it, they can. And having languages days in schools are really important as well, so that they can I used to do that quite a lot in school, so that they did things like might have had taster sessions in other languages, and food is a big aspect of any language, isn't it? And
it is absolutely.
Yeah, and we used to have lunches in maybe 3-course lunches from a different country, or they actually learnt about composers, and if they were in the orchestra, they learnt a piece of music, and I used to get people from the community to come in, so maybe somebody from a local pizzeria who was Italian, and they make a pizza with them, but talk to them in Italian whilst they were doing it, so they learnt about ingredients, but they also learnt about measuring. I had dance schools come in, so that they learnt the can and the flamenco, and they perform that to parents at the end of the day, and it was just a really engaging way of getting children to not just learn the language, but to understand lots of different aspects of the culture in a really enjoyable way. And so I mean, schools do that, but again, they take a huge amount of work, and it's having the time and the inclination to do it, I suppose. But the children benefit from them hugely. But yeah.
Yeah,
So,
cool stuff.
no,
Well,
yeah.
oh, that's a good point to stop there. That's a really interesting chat. I mean, we could carry on chatting about the link between music and language. I mean, actually, it's one of the tricks I have of actually teaching people to improvise. You know, you get them to speak and then use the rhythms of what they've just said, and then use the notes of the scale. And you know, to me, that's all it is. But you know, but it's amazing that suddenly people get it, that that's what's going on. Because again, you know, music's a language, so all the things you've been saying, I mean, I can just say, oh yeah, you know, I really get that totally. Lovely. Well, that was wonderful. Thank you very much. And hopefully, you know, you'll see some real results from what you're doing. Because I know it's like you feel sometimes it's.
We feel as though it's plugging away sometimes, but I mean, it's I've been doing it for a long time now, so I don't think I'll stop like you.
Yeah, I know. We'll keep going.
Keep going, yeah.
Anyway, that's lovely to see
you.
All right. Speak to you soon. Bye.
Okay, bye.